You know, when I first settled into the cabin my grandfather built, the one nestled up here, deep within the northern spine of Sierra Crest Estates, I never once imagined I'd end up at war with a homeowners association. Back then, the idea of any kind of bureaucratic red-taped drama reaching this far up into the trees, where the air smells like pine and silence, that felt genuinely laughable. The nearest cul-de-sac, that manicured perfect little slice of suburbia, was nearly a mile downhill, and my DI and folded in a lockbox under the floorboards. That thing dated back to before the HOA even existed. This mountain, it was in my blood. It was the only place where I felt I could finally breathe again, truly. After retiring from 32 years as a geological engineer, half of that time spent deployed for disaster assessment with the National Guard. My name is Grant Sterling. I'm 61 years old, divorced, and I suppose to someone like her, a solitary old man living up here in the woods with a beard and a good dog named Rainfall must have looked like the easiest mark in the world. But let me tell you something, she made a mistake. I know every inch of this land better than the people who tried to pave over it, and I knew, long before they drove the first stake, that their arrogance was going to cost them everything, and maybe more. The trouble, as trouble always does, began slowly, like the distant rumble of thunder on what felt like a perfectly clear sunny day. I'd spend mornings watching the fog lift off the trees, a thermos of black coffee in one hand, and Ranger curled at my feet. I handled the trails myself, maintained my own well system, ran solar panels off a quiet little ledge where the wind wouldn't catch them. I wasn't anti-society, just quiet preference, you know. A desire for honest ground. Then the HOA newsletters started showing up, stuffed into my mailbox, glossy paper full of new developments, playground upgrades, and plans to improve community connectivity through trail extensions. It was all worded like progress, like unity, but to me, it was a flashing red light. The trail extensions they were talking about, they would require carving directly into the eastern slope of my property line. At first, I chalked it up to a clerical error. I had never signed anything that subjected my land to HOA oversight. My grandfather Bernard made damn sure of that when he bought the land back in the late 50s. But over the decades, the HOA had expanded like Ivor, slow, invasive, and completely unrelenting. I walked the ridgeline with Ranger that afternoon, my old boots crunching across the familiar stones. That particular section of the mountain is fragile, not just sentimentally, but structurally. I had mapped the faults beneath it myself years ago during a private consulting contract with the State Geological Department. Underneath a thin layer of soil sat a fractured latticework of shale and ancient landslide zones, long dormant, sure, but never secure. Anyone who knew how to read a topographic map, anyone who respected the earth, would know better than to dig there. But HOA presidents, they don't read maps, they read budgets, and they envision ribbon cuttings. I wrote a letter, polite, firm. I explained the geological risks, attached scanned copies of the 1986 fault assessment, and mailed it certified to the HOA office and the county zoning department. Then I waited. The only reply I got was another newsletter. This time, the language was pointed. The Crestline Trail project, it read, had been approved unanimously by the board. Excavation was set to begin in July. I stared at that line for a long time, and I could practically hear my grandfather's dry drawl in my ear, that sound he made when someone was being truly foolish. "Give them rope, Grant," he used to say. "They'll hang themselves twice." The first bulldozer showed up on July 3rd. I heard it before I saw it, a mechanical groan echoing through the valley. Foreign and grating. Ranger barked and bolted toward the ridge. I followed, heart pounding. Sure enough, there it was. Yellow paint, fresh tracks, and a driver who looked up, startled, as I approached. He pointed me down to a white SUV parked at the base of the slope. That's where I met her, Veronica Thorne, HOA president. Tall, perfectly pressed khakis and sunglasses that never left her face, even under the shadow of the trees. She smiled at me like I was a neighbor stopping by with banana bread. "Mr. Sterling," she chirped, extending a hand I made no effort to take. "So glad you came down. We're finally making progress up here." "You're trespassing," I said flatly. Her smile didn't flinch. "Oh, I don't think so. This section is part of the community expansion zone now. It was voted on at the last meeting, Franklin." "I didn't attend that meeting," I corrected her, "because this isn't your jurisdiction. This is private land. It's mine." She waved vaguely at the mountain. "It's complicated." "No," I said, "it's really not." That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with miscommunication. I was dealing with entitlement wrapped in expensive polyester. Veronica wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in legacy. Hers, a trail named the Crestline, a ribbon cut in front of photographers. She didn't care about fault lines or erosion. She cared about optics. I told her to leave. She told me to contact the board if I had concerns. And then she got back in her SUV and drove away, leaving her machinery sitting right there on my land. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the wind. Ranger lay beside me, ears twitching. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept returning to that patch of earth they were about to disturb. If they kept digging, the consequences wouldn't just be bureaucratic. They would be geological, and absolutely unforgiving. I spent the next week poring over maps, deed records, geological surveys. Every document confirmed the same thing. My land was not part of the HOA, never had been, never would be, unless I voluntarily signed it over, which I hadn't. That was the end of the legal debate as far as I was concerned. But if there's one thing I've learned from decades dealing with bureaucracies, it's this. Just because something is true doesn't mean people will accept it, especially when it gets in the way of their ambition. The digging started slowly, but it accelerated quickly. Survey markers placed along my property line, pink flags fluttering like invaders planting their claim. I was forced to drive down to the HOA administrative building in town. I parked the truck and walked in with a manila folder filled with all the proof they needed. When Veronica walked out of her board meeting, smoothing her blazer, she greeted me like we were old friends. "I brought something for you," I said, holding out the folder. She took it with feigned curiosity and flipped through the contents. Copies of my property deed, the geotechnical survey, the zoning map with my parcel clearly marked. She didn't even finish looking through it. "Well, I'm sure the board will be happy to review all of this." "Review isn't necessary," I cut in. "It's clear. You are trespassing. Stop the project before someone gets seriously hurt." Her smile thinned. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your concerns, but we've already invested in the preliminary infrastructure. The trails are meant to benefit the entire community. You live here too, don't you?" "I live on my mountain," I replied. "That's not the same thing." She handed the folder back, untouched. "Thank you for your input." Input, that word echoed in my ears as I drove back up the winding road. It wasn't input, it was a warning, and they weren't going to listen. I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board. They thanked me, promised a review within 60 business days. 60 days. At mountain elevation, 60 days could mean 3 heavy rain cycles, the difference between minor erosion and a catastrophic slide. So, I called in a favor. Dr. Leo Chen, an old colleague from the National Guard, now with the state's Department of Environmental Quality, I sent him drone photos of the terrain, the excavation markers, and Veronica's planned path. He called me back 2 days later. "Grant," he said, his voice serious, "that slope is unstable. If they dig there, and we get even moderate rainfall, it's going to move. Can you issue a formal warning?" I asked. "I can write an advisory," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But enforcement has to come from local jurisdiction." He paused. "And for that, we need proof of activity and intent." "I'm working on it," I told him, and I set up motion-triggered trail cams along the edge of the ridge and began collecting daily footage. Every rock moved, every stake driven, every piece of equipment that rolled through. I logged it all. Still, the pace accelerated. One afternoon, I watched from the tree line as Veronica held a community vision session. Families showed up with kids and strollers, posing for mock ribbon cuttings on land they didn't legally own. Ranger growled low beside me, and I knelt to rest my hand on his back. "They're building on lies, boy," I whispered. "But nature doesn't care about politics, and it sure as hell doesn't care about HOA dreams." Then the dynamite arrived. Not a massive blast, just small charges to break apart rocky outcroppings, but the sound sent a jolt down my spine. They were getting reckless. I checked the trail cams that night. The footage showed a man placing what looked like detonators along a ridge barely 100 yards from the old shale fault. I emailed the video to Leo immediately. His reply was short: "They're out of their minds. I'm escalating this." The days blurred. Dust clouds rose each morning. Engines buzzed like hornets. I stopped sleeping well, kept waking up in the middle of the night to check for tremors, even when the air was still. Veronica stopped coming in person. She sent clipboard carriers and surveyors who didn't make eye contact when I passed them in the woods. They knew, somewhere deep down, they knew what they were doing was wrong, but they were already too far in. Budgets had been spent, names had been promised, and the sky above it all was starting to shift. The first storm rolled in on a Thursday afternoon, not more than a drizzle, but enough to paint the air with the scent of damp soil. I was on the ridge, checking the crumbling path their machines had left behind when I felt it. Not a quake, not yet, just a subtle flex under my boot. I crouched down, ran my hand across the loose shale. The soil was damped out of fine. They'd exposed the underlayer by carving too deep, too wide. Rainwater was seeping into places it hadn't touched in decades. That night, thunder rolled over the valley, the kind that doesn't boom, but crackles and lingers. The kind that sounds like something splintering just out of sight. The ground was whispering, and I was the only one listening. Then came the legal hammer. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up my gravel drive. Jasper growled low. I watched as 2 men in suits, one tall, one younger, stepped out. They looked ridiculously out of place among the pine trees. "Mr. Franklin Hale," the tall one said. "Grant Sterling," I corrected. He handed me a manila envelope. "You've been served." I didn't take it right away. "What am I being served for?" The younger one spoke up, rehearsed. "Cease and desist. Defamation. Obstruction of development. Interference with HOA operations." "So, let me get this straight," I said, slowly. "You dig into a known fault zone on land that doesn't belong to you, ignore every warning, And now you're threatening me because I'm telling the truth. You're not a licensed geologist anymore, Mr. Sterling. The tall man shifted uncomfortably. Your certifications are expired. Your data is unverified, and your accusations are creating unnecessary panic among residents. My fingers curled into fists. Ranger barked sharply one loud, aggressive warning, and both men stepped back. Good dog, I took the envelope at last. Tell Veronica I hope she's enjoying the view while it lasts. The letter was expensive paper, full of standard legal intimidation or reputational harm, loss of projected community value. They'd even attached screenshots of my posts in the community forum, flagged as misinformation. They were setting me up as the scapegoat, so when the mountain came down they could say I had incited panic, sabotaged their work, or worst of all, lied. But the mountain doesn't lie, and it was starting to shift. The rain hadn't let up for 3 days now. My gauge read over 6.2 inches. Saturation was at 7.4. That night I got a call from someone I didn't expect. Her name was Mrs. Elena Vance, a retired teacher, former HOA member. I believe you, Mr. Sterling, she said. Those 4 words hit me harder than I expected. She explained that Veronica had changed the charter 2 years ago, illegally redrawing the boundaries, classifying the ridge as unused green space. That's how they got their foot in, she whispered. I drove down to the town hall the next morning, rain hammering the windshield like warning taps. I met with a journalist from the local paper, Sarah Reyes. She was young, sharp, and skeptical at first. But as I walked her through the evidence, the fault line data, the ignored warnings, her brow furrowed deeper and deeper. Do you think it'll collapse? She asked. I met her eyes. I don't think, I said. I note 3 days later she ran the story. Front page, Mountain at Risk, HOA ignores warnings from retired geologist. Veronica was furious, of course. She held a press conference under her white canopy tent, smiling that politician's smile, standing next to her board members, Greg and Tina, but you could see it in her eyes. She was sweating, because the ground beneath her was no longer solid. By the 4th day of rain, the mountain had changed its voice. It no longer whispered. It groaned, the kind of sound that seeps up through your boots and into your spine, a deep, wet pressure that told anyone paying attention that something below was giving way. I saw the first vertical split open behind their main retaining wall, maybe 4 feet tall, 3 inches wide. To someone who understands terrain failure, it might as well have been a glowing red countdown clock at dawn. I barged into the zoning office again. Richard, I said to the director, Howard Miller, my boots dripping. You need to issue a stop order immediately. There's visible shearing. The retaining wall is buckling. If we get more rain tonight, that slope's going to move. He looked tired. Grant, I don't doubt your expertise, but legally the HOA has permits. The inspection logs don't show anything catastrophic. Because you're using the wrong inspectors, I snapped. Structurally, the entire east face of that slope is collapsing under saturation, and it's not just a trail that'll go down. If the fault slips, it could wipe out 3 backyards and the northern access road. I knew how politics worked. If he acted too soon and the slide didn't happen, he'd be blamed for halting development. If he waited, and disaster struck, he could pin it on unforeseen circumstances. They were gambling with time. That evening I walked the ridge one last time before dark. I heard it, a crack, sharp, short, like a bone snapping in the cold. I dropped to my knees, pressed a hand to the earth. It vibrated, the kind of tension that precedes surrender. I stood up slowly, turned to leave, and saw Veronica. She had come up the slope alone, probably to prove something to herself. She looked soaked, breathless. Her eyes met mine. What are you doing up here? She demanded. I could ask you the same. Just checking on the site, making sure things are stable. I almost laughed. Stable? You shouldn't even be up here. This mountain isn't your playground, Veronica. It's a living body, and you've been sawing at its knees. She opened her mouth to reply. But then there was another crack, louder this time. We both froze. A cascade of loose gravel tumbled from the slope below. We need to leave, I said. She hesitated just long enough to make me question whether pride could actually kill. Then she turned and followed me down the slope in silence. The next morning was unnaturally still. The rain resumed at 7:43 a.m., not a drizzle this time, a wall of water. It slammed against the roof like fists. Then came the rumble. It started at 9:14 a.m., low and deep, like thunder trapped inside the earth. Ranger was already barking. Frantic, I ran up the ridge, boots sliding in mud, old camcorder in hand. I needed to see it documented. I needed to bear witness. The ridge was chaos. Water poured in torrents down the freshly cut scars. The retaining wall, their last desperate attempt at control, cracked open with a sound like ripping steel. Then everything let go. I watched as the slope shifted, slow at first, like a giant exhaling. Then came the roar. Earth tore loose in wide, angry strips. Trees were wrenched from the soil, dragged into a spiral of mud and stone that raced downhill like an avalanche of black clay. A yellow backhoe, left parked near the fault line, vanished as the ground beneath it liquefied. The wooden frame of their crestline trail bent and folded like a toy bridge, and in the middle of it all, standing like a queen without her throne, was Veronica Thorne. Get out, I screamed from across the ridge run. She stumbled back, slipping on the mud, catching herself on a tree trunk. Greg and Tina came into view behind her, eyes wide in terror, both of them soaked and speechless. But the slide didn't care about terror. It moved fast now, a black tongue of destruction, licking its way through everything man-made. I kept the camera rolling, hands shaking, documenting it all from a ledge I had mapped decades ago, one of the few that remained structurally sound. The slide lasted for minutes and 12 seconds, long enough for half a mountain face to reconfigure itself, long enough to wipe away 7 months of unauthorized construction, long enough for the HOA's lies to become buried under the very land they thought they owned. And then came the quiet again, that post-collapse silence. It waits, as if the mountain itself is assessing what it's done, asking, did I say enough this time? I made my way down carefully, calling for help on the emergency radio. The board sat on the ground, shaking, drenched, defeated. Veronica's khakis were black with sludge. Her eyes, red and blinking rain, found mine not in anger, but in a kind of pleading disbelief, like she couldn't accept what the earth had done. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The mountain had spoken loud enough for both of us. The media coverage was immediate and brutal. Sarah Reyes ran a special report featuring clips from the footage I'd provided. The moment the slope cracked open, the backhoe getting swallowed, and then Veronica running, face pale, hair soaked, caught in the panic she had pretended would never come. There was no spinning that image. The HOA was no longer in control of the narrative. I received an email, a formal inquiry from the state's Department of Environmental Quality requesting access to my raw data. They were opening a case, HOA misconduct. The board began to fracture within days. Tina Morales resigned first. Then Greg Parsons disappeared. Someone posted a photo of a U-Haul parked outside his house, gone overnight. And then there was Veronica. She held on like a climber with no rope, until I received a letter from her attorney. They weren't threatening me this time. They were begging. They asked that I consider resolving any potential civil claims privately to preserve community morale. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it up, walked out to my fire pit, and dropped it into the flames. In just under 3 weeks, a group of residents collected enough signatures to force a board-wide recall vote. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd wronged. The landslide had done more than expose geological instability. It had unearthed years of suppressed resentment. On the day of the vote, I stood in the back of the hall, just watching. Over 200 residents showed up. The vote wasn't even close. Veronica Thorne was removed from her position by a margin of 179-6. I went home and stood at the edge of the rebuilt trail above the slope. The state had since declared the area an ecological hazard zone, closed to all future development. The new board, humble and less glossy, created an educational kiosk. They asked if they could include a plaque with my name on it. I told them no, but I offered a suggestion. Name the ridge after my grandfather, I said. He's the one who respected it first. Weeks passed. The season shifted. Grass began to regrow on the raw face of the mountain. Wildflowers sprang up defiantly where machines once clawed. Nature, as always, was healing in spite of us. I took Ranger for a long walk up the ridge. We passed the spot where the first backhoe had cut into the earth, now covered in moss. At the top, I stood by the new sign the HOA had installed. It read, Sterling Ridge Protected Natural Zone, dedicated in memory of Bernard Hale, 1926 to 1999. I closed my eyes and let the wind pass over me. I imagined him beside me, hands on hips, surveying the land with that quiet pride. And I smiled, because in the end, the mountain didn't belong to any of us. But it did remember who listened, and it rewarded those who fought for it with silence. The good kind. The kind that fills your lungs with something deeper than air. Something like peace. Look, the storm is over now, but the cleanup is still happening. What happened here exposed a lot of rot not just in the land, but in the belief that money and power can always defeat hard-won truth. But here's the question I want to leave you with. Veronica Thorne and the board. They got humiliated, they lost their seats, and their project was buried under a mountain. But 5 nearby homes were damaged, and 2 families had to evacuate. Did justice truly prevail, or did the mountain simply deliver disaster without regard for right and wrong? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do people like Veronica deserve to lose everything, or was the collateral damage too high a price for one man's vindication? Drop a like if you stood with a mountain, and subscribe to see what we build next.